The anxiety always arrives not when the scaffolding is removed, but when you realize the blueprint itself was merely a suggestion of where structure might have been. We measure our worth by the perceived necessity of our presence, building entire identities upon the assumed permanence of being irreplaceable. This need for intrinsic value becomes frantic when we observe even the slightest possibility of replacement. We are inherently creatures who define themselves through relation, through mutual acknowledgement and shared context. But what happens to the self when the relationship is merely instrumental? When your value is understood, implicitly or explicitly, only as a function of utility, rather than as an endpoint in itself? The philosophical stake here is profound. We must ask whether our modern fear of obsolescence is truly about careers or roles, or if it points to a deep, existential terror concerning the contingency of self. We will argue that fearing replacement does not stem from professional inadequacy, but from confronting the fundamental lack of intrinsic value in human existence, a concept better described as radical freedom. To begin this investigation, we must first establish what it means to be defined by others. The tradition of existentialism offers a crucial framework here. Thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre argued that existence precedes essence. This means that we are born without inherent purpose or nature, and we spend our lives defining ourselves through the choices we make. We are, in a very real sense, projects of self-creation. When our identity, the collection of roles, achievements, and recognized competencies, becomes externalized, when it is supplied entirely by others, we risk falling into what Heidegger called the they-self. This is the self that only exists for others to observe or need. We build elaborate masks of competence, efficiency, and necessary contribution because the simple acknowledgement of our spontaneous existence feels too thin, too unearned. To be useful is, for many, a desperate attempt to anchor a floating consciousness in solid ground. This reliance on external validation creates a fragile architecture. Our sense of self becomes contingent upon market demand or familial expectation. If we are replaceable, if another person can perform the same function, occupy the same niche, or fulfill the expected emotional role, our accumulated scaffolding threatens collapse. The anxiety is not merely economic, it is ontological. We fear the moment when the useful version of ourselves fails to meet the needs of the world, and in that failure, we fear losing the self altogether. This dynamic forces us into a perpetual state of performance, where authenticity is sacrificed at the altar of optimized productivity. But this focus on utility misses a vital point. The very act of fearing replacement requires an assumption of scarcity. It assumes that there is a limited pool of value, that if someone else enters the picture, your value must diminish correspondingly. This line of thought limits us to a transactional model of being human, treating relationships and skills as commodities. We are encouraged to view life through terms of return on investment, whether emotional or professional. The genuine complication lies in recognizing that true self-worth is not generated by subtraction, by how much others need you, but by addition, the relentless expansion of what it means simply to be present. This brings us to a radical counterposition, one suggested by Stoic philosophy and ancient thinkers who practiced deep detachment. They understood that most suffering arises from attachment to things outside our immediate control. Our fear of replacement is fundamentally an attachment to perceived permanence, to the idea that this version of ourselves will always matter. The philosophical shift required is a move away from defining self through action or role and toward understanding self as pure capacity for change. If we accept that all roles are temporary, all connections are migratory, and all skills are destined for obsolescence, then where does the core self reside? It resides in its ability to bear contradiction, to exist even when it is structurally unnecessary. To embrace this fluidity means abandoning the desperate attempt to prove one's uniqueness through exceptional achievement. Applying this realization to lived life requires a deliberate practice of devaluation. We must deliberately spend time, perhaps alone, engaged in activities that are neither marketable nor praised. This could be reading an obsolete language, mastering a purely aesthetic skill without commercial application, or simply sitting in silence with no agenda for self-improvement. These moments function as intellectual resistance to the prevailing narrative of constant utility. They teach us that our highest value might lie precisely in the things we cannot quantify, catalogue, or deploy on demand. We learn that some truths are valuable only because they resist being packaged into a bullet-point list of deliverables. When you return to the moment where the anxiety first struck, that unexpected notification, that difficult conversation suggesting redundancy, that casual observation from a peer, it will not strike with the same blinding terror. The scaffolding may still threaten collapse, but you have learned that the blueprints were always negotiable. The fundamental paradox remains. We seek profound connection and deep belonging, yet our current cultural operating system rewards only portable efficiency. We mistake necessity for meaning. The fear of replacement is thus a symptom of a deeper misunderstanding of what human worth can be. It suggests that value must be generated in the external world, attached to objects or roles. But true self-possession requires locating value internally, within the messy, unoptimized space between one thought and the next. We are not defined by what we do for others, but by the quiet fact of our persistent consciousness facing the vastness of time. We chase replacement because we have been taught that our utility equals our existence. We build careers not just for sustenance, but as monuments to self-worth, a monumental labor designed to prove we are still indispensable. When automation promises a worker's job, or when AI can generate art faster than a decade of practice, the terror is visceral. It feels like an erasure of identity itself. This isn't merely economic anxiety. It's existential panic dressed up in corporate jargon. We fear being rendered obsolete because we have conflated our inherent value. The simple fact that we are here, experiencing consciousness, with the specific set of tasks we can perform for a quarterly report or a digital feed. The Industrial Revolution stripped us of craft and replaced it with processes. The information age has done something similar to our minds, encouraging us to view ourselves as collections of marketable data points rather than complex, messy narratives. But what if the greatest threat isn't the robot taking your job, but the cultural habit of viewing life itself as a resource to be optimally allocated? If we could decouple worth from output, the landscape would change dramatically. We would need to rediscover the value of unproductive time, the hours spent staring out a window with no agenda, reading a book just because it's beautiful, or simply sitting in silence. These moments are not merely gaps between tasks. They are the essential nutrients for the soul, the places where true self-definition can occur away from the relentless pressure of performance. This realization requires a painful shift in perspective, recognizing that our capacity to feel awe, to empathize with strangers, to hold contradictory thoughts simultaneously, these are things algorithms struggle with because they lack lived history and vulnerable subjectivity. They possess pattern recognition. We possess flawed consciousness. Our uniqueness lies not in efficiency, but in depth, in the ability to appreciate the inherent imperfection of being human. Ultimately, the fear of replacement is a sophisticated echo of primal insecurity. It whispers that if we are not useful, we do not matter. To truly overcome it, we must learn to find the source of our value again, deep within ourselves. We need to accept the paradox that sometimes the most valuable thing a person can be is simply themselves, unoptimized, unmarketable, and gloriously resistant to categorization. The peace begins when we understand that existence itself is enough. It does not require continuous justification through productivity. It only requires presence.